Today, we're going to dive into one of the most incredible stories of our time, how we created a weapon that could end the world and then spent the next 75 years desperately trying to figure out how to live with it.
Think about it. For most of modern history, there's been this one single threat hanging over all of us. It completely changed the rules of war, of politics, and even how we think about the future. And this is the story of how we dealt with it. It's a story filled with fear, amazing innovation, some terrifyingly close calls, and the fragile, complicated system we built to keep ourselves from going over the edge.
So where did it all start? Well, it began with a scientific breakthrough that handed humanity a problem it had never faced before, a weapon so powerful it made the whole idea of winning a war pretty much obsolete. Okay, so in 1945, the US was the only country with the bomb. But that didn't last long, at all. By 1949, the Soviets had one too, and just like that, the race was on. The American response? President Truman gave the green light for the hydrogen bomb, a weapon literally thousands of times stronger. And that just kicked off this insane, terrifying spiral of one-upmanship. And listen to this. This quote isn't from some peace activist. This is from the Soviet premier, the guy who took over right after Stalin. It just goes to show you that even the top brass in the Kremlin knew they were dealing with something completely new. These weapons didn't just win wars anymore. They could end civilization itself.
So you've got both superpowers armed with these world-ending weapons. And the big question became, how do you even plan to use something like that? And the answers they came up with were, well, they were incredibly dangerous.
The first big idea was a strategy called massive retaliation. The logic was pretty simple and, honestly, pretty brutal. If the Soviets tried anything, and I mean anything, even a conventional attack, the US would respond with everything it had. It was a giant, all-or-nothing tripwire for the end of the world.
And here's the wild paradox. Publicly, the Soviet leader Khrushchev was all about bluster and threats. But behind the scenes, after he saw his own country's H-bomb test, he was terrified. He couldn't sleep. He came to the exact same conclusion as the other side. These things were just too powerful to ever actually use. So people started to realize that massive retaliation had a huge flaw. I mean, would you really risk global annihilation over a small border dispute? It just wasn't believable. So the Kennedy administration came up with flexible response. The idea here was to have a whole menu of options, from conventional troops to smaller nuclear strikes, so you could match the threat without immediately hitting the big red button. You can really see the thinking evolve here, right? It goes from one giant on-off switch to a more complex control panel. They were trying to make the threat more believable, and in their minds, a more effective way to prevent war. But, it was still a game of chicken with the highest stakes imaginable. And in October 1962, that game of chicken almost ended in a head-on collision. For 13 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis, all the theory and strategy suddenly became horrifyingly real. The world came closer to nuclear war than it ever has, before or since. The shock of the Cuban Missile Crisis was a massive wake-up call. It forced both the US and the Soviet Union to admit that they couldn't go on like this. They had to create a system, a set of rules of the road, to manage this thing and make sure it never, ever happened again. And that led to this grim but strangely stable logic we call mutual assured destruction. You've probably heard of it as MAD. It sounds crazy, but the thinking was, if I know you can destroy me and you know I can destroy you no matter who strikes first, well then neither of us is dumb enough to start the fight. Our shared destruction became the ultimate guarantee of peace.
So based on that grim logic, they started building guardrails. The famous hotline between Washington and Moscow was set up right away, and then came years of tough negotiations that created a whole web of treaties, banning nuclear tests, trying to stop the spread of nukes, limiting the number of missiles, and even getting rid of entire classes of weapons.
By the 1980s, this idea was basically gospel. And this wasn't a partisan thing. You have President Reagan here, who was famously tough on the Soviets, saying the exact same thing. This shared understanding that a nuclear war is totally unwinnable became the bedrock of stability for decades. Okay, so that brings us to today. Because that stability, that system that was so carefully built over all those years, well, it's facing its biggest test since the Cold War ended. And here's the problem. That whole framework of treaties that kept the peace is just falling apart. The ABM Treaty, which was the cornerstone of the whole MAD concept, gone. The INF Treaty, the one that took a whole category of dangerous missiles out of Europe, gone. The Open Skies Treaty, a key way to keep tabs on each other, also gone. It's like we're pulling the bricks out of a dam one by one.
Right now, there is only one major arms control treaty left between the US and Russia. It's called New START, and it limits the biggest, most dangerous long-range nukes. But look at the bottom there. It expires in early 2026, and right now, there's absolutely nothing lined up to replace it.
And trying to negotiate a new deal is way harder now. For one, it's not just a two-player game anymore. China's a huge nuclear power now, and it doesn't want to join any talks. Then you have all these smaller, tactical nukes that were never covered by these treaties. And on top of all that, new technology is creating weapons the original treaty writers couldn't even have dreamed of.
We are absolutely in a new technological arms race. We're talking about hypersonic weapons that are almost impossible to stop, nuclear-powered underwater drones, cruise missiles that can fly for days. These things are designed specifically to get around old defenses and completely upend the stability we used to rely on.
Which leaves us with a really, really unsettling question. For more than 50 years, we came up with a set of rules. Terrifying rules, sure, but rules that helped us survive the nuclear age. Now that rulebook is being torn to shreds. And the biggest challenge we face now is figuring out what, if anything, is going to replace it.